Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, his 4 eyes scanning the holographic display that showed the approaching human fleet. The massive Krell warship hummed with power, its bioorganic hull pulsing with a sickly green light that had struck fear into countless species across the galaxy. Around him, his crew worked at their stations, their chitinous fingers dancing across control surfaces that were grown rather than built. "Report!" Zethkar commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the ship's living corridors. Sub-Commander Yexthi approached, her mandibles clicking nervously. "The human fleet has dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, Admiral. Initial scans show 47 vessels of various classifications." Zethkar's secondary eyes rotated to focus on her, while his primary eyes remained fixed on the display. 47 ships? The intelligence reports indicated they would bring at least 300 vessels to defend their core worlds. "The scans are confirmed, sir. 47 ships total. Our fleet numbers 823 vessels, including this flagship." A sound that might have been laughter emerged from Zethkar's throat. The Krell had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade, each time meeting fierce resistance that required overwhelming force to overcome. The humans, however, seemed to have vastly underestimated the threat they faced. The bridge fell silent, except for the organic humming of the ship's systems. Through the transparent biopolymer viewing ports, the crew could see the assembled might of the Krell armada stretching in all directions. Massive dreadnoughts floated alongside swarms of smaller attack vessels, their living hulls occasionally twitching as internal organs adjusted to battle configuration. "Perhaps the humans know they cannot win," suggested Tactical Coordinator Vixnall, his voice carrying a hint of disappointment. "Many species simply surrender when faced with our full might." Zethkar considered this possibility. The human colonies they had encountered on the Outer Rim had fought with surprising tenacity, but they had been small outposts with limited resources. This was Earth itself, the human homeworld, and yet they had sent fewer ships than some minor colony worlds had managed to field. "Sensor analysis of the human vessels," Zethkar ordered. The main display shifted, showing detailed readouts of the human ships. They were sleek, angular constructions of metal and composite materials, looking almost fragile compared to the massive bioships of the Krell. The largest human vessel was barely a third the size of a Krell dreadnought. Their ships appear to be constructed using primitive metallurgy and chemical propulsion systems, reported the sensor operator. "Energy signatures are minimal compared to our biofusion reactors. No visible organic components." "Weapons analysis?" "Projectile-based systems primarily, with some directed energy weapons. Nothing that should penetrate our adaptive bioarmor." Zethkar nodded slowly. The Krell had developed their biotechnology over thousands of years, creating ships that could heal from damage, adapt to new threats, and grow stronger during combat. Their enemies' weapons would become less effective over time as the ship's living armor learned to defend against them. "Distance to engagement range? 12 minutes at current approach speed." The Admiral moved to the tactical display, watching as the two fleets slowly converged. The human formation was tight and disciplined, but their numbers were simply inadequate. It would be over quickly. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through." The display flickered, and the image of a human appeared. The creature was smaller than a Krell, with pale skin and only 2 eyes positioned in the front of its head. It wore what appeared to be some kind of military uniform. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force," the human said, its voice carried by the ship's translation systems. "You are entering Earth space without authorization. Turn back now, or face the consequences." Several of the Krell bridge crew made clicking sounds that indicated amusement. The human's tone was firm, almost commanding. despite being outnumbered nearly 20-1. "I am Admiral Zethkar of the Krell Dominion," he replied. "Your world will surrender immediately, or we will take it by force. Your fleet is vastly outnumbered. I offer you one chance to save your people from unnecessary suffering." The human admiral's expression did not change. "Admiral Zethkar, I'm going to tell you something that might save a lot of lives today. You should turn around and leave this system immediately." "You threaten us? With 47 ships against our armada?" "I'm not threatening you," Admiral Chen said calmly. "I'm trying to warn you, but I can see you won't listen. Chen out." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent again. "Arrogant creatures," muttered Subcommander Yexthi. "They speak as if they hold some advantage we cannot see." Zethkar studied the tactical display more carefully. The human fleet had not moved to attack formation. Instead, they had arranged themselves in what appeared to be a defensive screen around their homeworld. It was a textbook formation for a fleet preparing to sell itself dearly while protecting evacuation transports. "Scan for additional human vessels," he ordered. "Perhaps they have reserves hidden behind their moon or in nearby asteroid fields." The sensor sweeps came back negative. No hidden fleets, no massive space stations bristling with weapons. Just 47 ships and a planet that seemed remarkably unprepared for the assault about to fall upon it. "Time to weapons range?" 8 minutes, Admiral. Zethkar activated the fleet communication channel. "All vessels, prepare for battle formation. Primary targets are the human military vessels. Once they are eliminated, we will begin bombardment of strategic targets on the planet's surface." Across the armada, hundreds of bioships began to shift and change. Weapon ports opened like flowering buds, revealing the organic cannons within. The ships themselves seemed to grow larger as internal chambers filled with combat gases and their hulls thickened for battle. The human fleet, by contrast, remained motionless in its defensive formation. "Are they planning to fight at all?" wondered Vixnall aloud. "Perhaps they hope to negotiate once we are in weapons range," suggested another officer. But Admiral Zethkar was studying the sensor readings more carefully. Something about the human ships was bothering him, though he could not identify what. They were smaller than expected, and their energy signatures were lower than most spacefaring vessels he had encountered. Yet there was something about their construction that seemed oddly purposeful. "Focus sensors on the human flagship," he ordered. The display zoomed in on Admiral Chen's vessel. It was sleek and angular, with what appeared to be multiple weapon systems distributed across its hull, but the energy readings were still remarkably low for a ship of its size. "Admiral, I'm detecting some unusual readings from the human vessels," reported the sensor operator, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "Explain." "Their hulls appear to be constructed of some kind of composite material, but the internal structure is strange. There are spaces that our sensors cannot penetrate, almost as if they are lined with some kind of interference material." Zethkar's 4 eyes all focused on the display. "Stealth technology. Possible, but not like anything we've encountered before. The interference is selective. We can scan some areas, but not others. Time to weapons range? 4 minutes. The Krell Admiral felt a small flutter of unease. In all his years of conquest, he had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that something was wrong with this picture. "Signal the fleet to maintain battle formation but reduce approach speed. I want continuous deep scans of those ships." "Reducing speed, Admiral. But, sir, this will give the humans more time to prepare whatever defenses they might have." "Do it." As the massive Krell fleet slowed its approach, more detailed sensor information began to filter in. The human ships were indeed constructed differently than any vessels they had encountered. Their hulls were thick but not heavily armored. Their weapon signatures were consistent with projectile and energy weapons, but the power system seemed insufficient to operate them at full capacity. Unless, Zethkar realized with growing concern. Those weren't the only power systems on the ships. Sensor operator, focus on the areas our scans cannot penetrate. What would cause that kind of interference? Unknown, Admiral. The effect is similar to what we might see from dense concentrations of exotic matter, or perhaps some kind of containment field. Containment field for what? Before anyone could answer, alarms began to sound throughout the bridge. The sensor operator's mandibles were clicking rapidly as he worked at his station. Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human fleet. The power signatures are increasing exponentially. On the main display, the human ships began to change. What had appeared to be standard hull plating retracted, revealing underlying structures that gleamed with barely contained energy. The ships themselves seemed to grow brighter, and space around them began to shimmer with some kind of field effect. What are those readings? Zethkar demanded. Unknown energy type, Admiral. The signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Power levels are now exceeding our own flagship by several orders of magnitude. The bridge crew stared in shocked silence as the 47 human ships transformed before their eyes. What had appeared to be simple, primitive vessels were revealing themselves to be something else entirely. Admiral, the communications officer called out, we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet. Put it through. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen again, but this time there was something different about her expression. The polite firmness had been replaced by what could only be described as grim determination. Admiral Zethkar, this is your final warning. You have approximately 30 seconds to order your fleet to retreat before we are forced to demonstrate why only 47 ships were deemed sufficient for this engagement. Zethkar stared at the human admiral, then at his sensor readings, then back at the display showing the now glowing human fleet. What are you? He whispered. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly, almost as if she felt sorry for him. We're the species that learned to harness the power of stars, Admiral. And you've just brought your fleet within range of ours. The countdown ended in silence. Admiral Zethkar watched in horror as the human ships unleashed something that defied everything the Krell knew about warfare. It wasn't the flash of plasma cannons or the green glow of bioweapons. Instead, space itself seemed to fold around the human vessels as they fired. The first volley struck the forward elements of the Krell fleet with surgical precision. Where mighty bio-dreadnoughts had floated moments before, there was now nothing but rapidly expanding clouds of superheated gas and debris. The ships hadn't been destroyed so much as they had been unmade at the molecular level. "Report!" Zethkar roared, though his voice betrayed the fear he was trying to suppress. 63 vessels destroyed in the first salvo, the sensor operator stammered, his voice barely audible over the emergency alarms. Admiral, the energy discharge was beyond our ability to measure. Whatever they're using, it's operating on principles we don't understand. The human fleet had fired again while the Krell were still processing the destruction of their vanguard. This time, the weapons seemed different, streams of coherent energy that moved through space like living things, seeking out targets with impossible accuracy. When they struck, entire sections of Krell ships simply ceased to exist, leaving behind perfectly smooth spherical voids in the hulls. "Evasive maneuvers," Zethkar commanded. "All ships scatter and engage at maximum range." But the Krell fleet, designed for overwhelming force against inferior opponents, was not built for the kind of tactical flexibility now required. The massive bioships were powerful but slow, and their organic control systems needed time to process and react to new threats. The humans, meanwhile, moved with a coordination that seemed impossible. Their ships danced through space in perfect formation, never interfering with each other's firing solutions, never presenting the same target twice. It was as if the entire fleet was controlled by a single mind operating at the speed of light. "Admiral," called out the tactical coordinator, "the human weapons appear to be some kind of matter manipulation technology. They're not just destroying our ships, they're reorganizing matter at the quantum level." Another wave of destruction swept through the Krell fleet. A biocarrier that had taken decades to grow was reduced to its component atoms in less than a second. A cluster of attack vessels simply vanished as space itself seemed to fold in on them. "How many ships have we lost?" Zethkar demanded. 234 confirmed destroyed, Admiral. Another 57 are severely damaged and falling behind the main formation. In less than 5 minutes of combat, the Krell had lost nearly a third of their fleet, without inflicting any apparent damage on the humans. The supposedly primitive species had revealed themselves to be masters of technology so advanced that it bordered on incomprehensible. "Signal general retreat," Zethkar ordered. "All ships fall back to minimum safe distance for hyperspace jump." But as the surviving Krell vessels began to turn away from Earth, they discovered that retreat was not going to be as simple as they had hoped. The human ships moved to intercept, their impossible weapons reaching across vast distances of space to strike with pinpoint accuracy. A massive Krell dreadnought, its bio-armor layers thick enough to withstand conventional bombardment for hours, was struck by what appeared to be a tiny projectile, no larger than a grain of sand. The impact created a chain reaction that tore through the ship's organic structure, causing it to collapse in on itself like a deflating balloon. "What was that weapon?" Zethkar asked, though he was beginning to suspect that traditional concepts of weapons were inadequate to describe what they faced. "Analysis suggests it was a microscopic black hole, Admiral, artificially created and precisely controlled." The bridge crew fell silent. Creating black holes required manipulation of gravity on a scale that the Krell had never imagined possible. It was the kind of technology that should have taken millions of years to develop. "How long have the humans possessed this technology?" Zethkar asked the question more to himself than to his crew. The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Chen's voice filled the bridge through the communications system, calm and matter-of-fact despite the ongoing battle. "Admiral Zethkar, your retreat vector is blocked. Please order your remaining ships to power down their weapons and prepare to be escorted out of this system." Zethkar activated the return channel. "Admiral Chen, I must know. How long has your species possessed such advanced technology?" There was a pause before the human admiral responded. "Advanced. Admiral, these are our standard defensive systems. We've had them for nearly a century." The Krell admiral's mind reeled. A century was nothing in galactic terms, barely enough time for most species to develop basic spaceflight. Yet the humans spoke of matter manipulation and artificial black holes as if they were routine military equipment. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No species develops this quickly." "You're making the same mistake many others have made," Admiral Chen replied, and there was something almost educational in her tone. "You assume that because we're young, we must be primitive. But, Admiral, we've been at war with ourselves for our entire recorded history. We've had to innovate or die." Another group of Krell ships tried to break away from the main fleet, perhaps hoping to escape while the humans were focused on the main force. They were intercepted by what appeared to be a single human vessel. The ship deployed something that looked like a metallic cloud, which surrounded the fleeing Krell ships and began to dismantle them piece by piece. "Nanotechnology," Admiral Chen's voice continued, as if she were providing a lecture rather than overseeing a battle. "We developed it to help clean up the environmental damage from our early industrial period. It turned out to be quite useful for other applications." Zethkar watched as his fleet continued to be systematically dismantled. The humans weren't just defeating them. They were demonstrating a level of technological sophistication that made the Krell look like primitives armed with clubs. "Your biotechnology is impressive," Admiral Chen continued. "Growing ships instead of building them is an elegant solution to many engineering problems, but you've been thinking too small. Admiral, you've limited yourselves to biology when the universe offers so much more." On the tactical display, Zethkar could see that fewer than 300 of his ships remained operational. The retreat was turning into a rout, with human vessels pursuing and destroying fleeing Krell ships with casual efficiency. "What do you want from us?" Zethkar asked, the fight draining out of his voice. "Nothing, Admiral. We never wanted anything from you. You came here with the intention of conquering our world and enslaving our people. We're simply explaining why that was a poor decision." Another wave of destruction swept through the Krell formation. Ships that had taken centuries to grow were reduced to their component elements in seconds. The organic armor that the Krell had thought invincible proved useless against weapons that operated on fundamental forces. "But we will offer you the same choice we offer all species that make this mistake," Admiral Chen continued. "You can leave this system immediately and never return, or you can be destroyed. The choice is entirely yours." Zethkar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were no longer the confident conquerors who had entered this system. They were frightened beings who had encountered something beyond their comprehension. "If we leave," he asked carefully, "will you pursue us? Will you attack our home worlds?" "Admiral, we have 47 ships dedicated to the defense of this single system. Do you really think we're interested in conquering anyone else's worlds?" "We have our own problems to worry about." The casual mention of 47 ships sent a chill through Zethkar's exoskeleton. If this was just the home defense fleet of one system, what kind of forces could the humans deploy if they chose to go on the offensive? "All ships," Zethkar broadcast to his remaining fleet, "cease all offensive operations and assume withdrawal formation." The surviving Krell vessels slowly began to regroup, their bio-armor scarred and smoking from near misses. Nearly half of the mighty armada was gone, destroyed in less than 30 minutes by a force they had dismissed as insignificant. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "the humans are maintaining their positions but have ceased fire." On the main display, the human fleet remained in perfect formation, their ships still glowing with barely contained energy. They could have easily completed the destruction of the Krell force, but they had chosen to stop. "Why did they cease their attack?" asked Sub-Commander Yexthi. Admiral Chen's voice provided the answer. "Because the lesson is complete, Admiral. You now understand the situation. We don't particularly enjoy destruction for its own sake. We've seen enough of that in our own history." Zethkar studied the tactical display one more time. His fleet was broken, his confidence shattered, and his understanding of the galaxy fundamentally changed. The humans had revealed themselves to be not just technologically superior, but strategically sophisticated enough to know when to stop fighting. "Admiral Chen," he said finally, "I formally request safe passage out of this system for my remaining ships." "Granted, Admiral, but understand that this courtesy extends only to this occasion. If Krell forces enter human space again, we will consider it an act of war, and our response will be comprehensive." The threat hung in the space between the two fleets like a physical presence. Zethkar had no doubt that the humans were capable of carrying it out. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, Admiral Zethkar stood before the Grand Assembly of the Krell Dominion, delivering what would become known as the most important report in their species' history. The massive biochamber that housed their governing body was filled with representatives from across their territory, all eager to understand how their seemingly invincible fleet had been so thoroughly defeated. "The humans," Zethkar began, his voice carrying clearly through the organic acoustics of the chamber, "are not what we believed them to be. Our intelligence was not merely incomplete, it was catastrophically wrong." Grand Counselor Mexithara, her ancient carapace bearing the scars of a dozen campaigns, leaned forward in her living throne. "Explain to us, Admiral, how a species barely 2 centuries into space travel could possess technology that reduced our greatest fleet to debris." Zethkar activated the bioluminescent display that grew from the chamber's floor. Images of the battle began to play, showing the systematic destruction of the Krell Armada in painful detail. "The first mistake we made was assuming that technological development follows a predictable pattern," he said. "We believed that because humans were young, they must be primitive. But humans did not develop like other species." The display shifted to show recordings of human history that had been painstakingly compiled from various sources across the galaxy. Images of human conflicts throughout their development flashed past, primitive wars with clubs and stones evolving into mechanized warfare, then nuclear weapons, then things that defied classification. While most species achieve unity before reaching space, Zethkar continued, humans took a different path. They remained divided, competitive, and constantly at war with themselves. This forced them to innovate at an unprecedented rate. Council member Yithkor spoke up from the middle ranks, but surely their division would weaken them. "How can a species at war with itself develop advanced technology?" "That was our second critical error," Zethkar replied. "We assumed that conflict weakens development. For humans, it accelerates it. Every weapon they created to use against each other became more advanced than what came before. Every defense had to be stronger, every attack more precise." The display now showed human technological progression, and the assembled Krell watched in fascination and growing horror as the timeline advanced. The gap between major innovations grew shorter and shorter, while the complexity increased exponentially. By the time they achieved spaceflight, Zethkar explained, humans had already mastered nuclear fusion, quantum mechanics, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence, technologies that took us millennia to develop. They achieved in mere centuries because they were forced to. Grand Counselor Mexthara's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "But Admiral, surely their small numbers would limit their capabilities? Our intelligence suggested they controlled only a handful of systems." "That was our third mistake," Zethkar said grimly. "We measured their strength by the number of worlds they controlled, not by what they had done with them. Humans don't expand territory to gain resources. They expand resources to support their technology." The display showed images of human industrial capabilities that had been gathered by long-range reconnaissance. Orbital manufacturing facilities surrounded their worlds like metallic rings. Asteroid belts had been converted into vast mining operations. Even the human sun was being harvested for energy through massive collection arrays. "A single human system produces more advanced technology than our entire dominion," Zethkar stated flatly. "They have achieved something we never thought possible. They have made scarcity irrelevant." The chamber erupted in clicking and chittering as the assembled Krell tried to process this information. Several council members spoke at once, their voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. "Order!" Mexthara commanded, and the chamber fell silent. "Admiral, you speak of impossibilities. No species can eliminate scarcity." "The humans have," Zethkar replied. "They have machines that can build machines that can build other machines. They have artificial intelligence that designs new technology faster than biological minds can comprehend it. They have mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself." The display shifted again, showing the aftermath of the battle. Human ships were towing damaged Krell vessels to what appeared to be repair facilities. But instead of simply patching the bioships, the humans were studying them, learning from them, incorporating Krell biological innovations into their own designs. "Even in defeat, we taught them," Zethkar said quietly. "Within days of the battle, human ships began appearing with bio-armor integration. They took our greatest achievement and made it better." Council member Drekneth rose from his position near the chamber's edge. "Admiral, if the humans are so advanced, why did they not pursue our fleet? Why did they not counterattack our worlds?" "Because," Zethkar said, and his voice carried a weight that silenced the entire chamber. "They don't need to. The humans have achieved something beyond our comprehension. They have grown beyond the need for conquest." The display showed recent intelligence gathered from the human border regions, trade ships moving freely between systems, massive construction projects that served no military purpose, scientific expeditions exploring distant nebulae for the simple pursuit of knowledge. "The humans fight only when attacked," Zethkar explained. "They have no interest in controlling other species because they have no need for what other species possess. They have transcended the basic drives that motivate most civilizations." "Then what do they want?" asked Mexthara. "To be left alone to pursue their development," Zethkar replied. "They are not conquerors, counselors. They are explorers. They seek knowledge, not territory, understanding, not dominance." The chamber fell into a heavy silence as the implications of this revelation settled over the assembled Krell. Everything they believed about galactic politics, about the nature of advanced civilizations, had been proven wrong by a single encounter. "What do you recommend, Admiral?" Mexthara asked finally. Zethkar straightened to his full height. "I recommend that we immediately cease all expansion in the direction of human space. I recommend that we open diplomatic channels and attempt to establish trade relations. And I recommend that we begin studying human development models to understand how they achieved what they have." "You suggest we learn from them?" The question came from the chamber's youngest member, Council Representative Pexilia. "I suggest that we acknowledge reality," Zethkar replied. "The humans represent an entirely new form of civilization. They have solved problems we didn't even know existed. If we are wise, we will study their methods and adapt what we can to our own development." The display changed one final time, showing long-range scans of human space. The images revealed construction projects on a scale that dwarfed anything the Krell had attempted. Dyson swarms were being built around multiple stars. Artificial worlds larger than planets floated in the void. Space itself was being structured and organized according to human needs. "There is more," Zethkar said quietly. "Our long-range reconnaissance has detected similar technological signatures in 17 other regions of the galaxy. The humans are not unique. They are simply the first of their kind that we have encountered." The clicking and chittering that erupted from the assembly was deafening. The implications were staggering. If there were other species like the humans, then the Krell's entire approach to galactic civilization would need to be reconsidered. "The galaxy is changing," Zethkar continued when the noise subsided. "Species are emerging that have taken different evolutionary paths, developed different solutions to the challenges of existence. We can either adapt to this new reality or be left behind by it." Grand Counselor Mexthara was silent for a long moment, her ancient eyes studying the images of human achievement. "Admiral, do you believe the humans would be willing to share their knowledge with us?" "I believe they would be willing to trade it," Zethkar replied carefully. "But we would need to have something of equal value to offer. Our biotechnology interests them, but we would need to develop it far beyond its current state to make meaningful exchanges." "Then that is what we shall do," Mexthara declared. "The age of conquest is ending, counselors. The age of cooperation is beginning. We will learn from those who have surpassed us, and perhaps in time, we too will transcend our limitations." As the assembly began to debate the practical implications of this new direction, Zethkar thought back to his final conversation with Admiral Chen. She had offered him a piece of advice that he now understood was more profound than he had realized at the time. "Admiral," she had said, "the universe is vast enough for everyone to find their own path to greatness. The key is recognizing that there are many paths, not just one." The Krell had spent centuries following a single path, the path of conquest and domination. They had assumed it was the only way to grow, the only way to advance. But the humans had shown them that there were other possibilities, other ways to achieve greatness. Now, as he listened to his people debate their future, Zethkar allowed himself to feel something he had not experienced in decades: hope. Hope that the Krell could learn, could adapt, could become something greater than they had ever imagined. The galaxy was indeed changing, and for the first time in his long life, Admiral Zethkar believed that change might be for the better. Outside the biochamber, deep space monitoring stations were already detecting new signals from human space. Construction projects that defied comprehension were beginning across multiple systems. The humans were building something new, something that would reshape their understanding of what was possible. And somewhere in the vast network of communications that connected human worlds, Admiral Chen was filing her own report about the Krell encounter. Her conclusion was simple and optimistic. First, successful diplomatic contact with biotechnology civilization achieved. Cultural exchange opportunities identified. Recommend continued monitoring and eventual formal contact when their development reaches appropriate level. The galaxy is becoming a more interesting place. The age of human isolation was ending. The age of galactic cooperation was about to begin. And the species that had learned to harness the power of stars were preparing to teach others how to reach for their own impossible dreams.